here's what it's going to cost us if that happens and goes down, or we lose that production line or facility or whatever you're looking at. And it's got to go to dollars and cents. That's how businesses make decisions, is what's their financial risk to the organization and how do you mitigate it? People don't understand what they can't see. And when they can't see all of those assets and all of that inventory and all of that stuff, they don't understand it.
Welcome to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. In each episode, we dive into the world of industrial cybersecurity. Join us as we cover the latest trends, innovations, and practical insights as we talk with leaders and practitioners across the industry. Gear up and let's get into this week's episode.
Hi, I'm Craig Duckworth.
And I'm his sidekick, Dino.
You got the sidekick part right. So
happy Friday, Craig.
Happy Friday, Dino. What a beautiful fall day it is here in St. Louis. Love it.
Yep.
So as we look around, and we got the Art Festival downstairs getting ready to kick off this weekend in Clayton, and all of the stuff regarding manufacturing. I look around at all this, I'm like, okay, so what are you thinking topic today? I'm thinking possibly, as we're transitioning seasons, as we're transitioning around, how about we talk about the role of the CIO or CISO as it relates to manufacturing, which we've done a couple of times. And my favorite topic is you have responsibility, but you don't have authority, and how we can help bridge that. And is there a better method possibly?
Maybe we ought to describe what you mean by that, right? So what is it that we actually witness working in manufacturing environments, assisting with OT cybersecurity strategies for clients, deploying technologies, providing services and support around these OT cybersecurity technologies, as it relates to their industrial control system environment. Why is it that they have the responsibility, right? I don't think too many people will argue who is your cybersecurity owner in your organization. But what do you mean that you don't have the authority?
And what I would say is, and I see this and witness this all the time when I'm in a plant, is the CISO or whoever has the responsibility of ensuring cyber resilience for the organization as a whole that reports to the board or the CEO or whoever they're tasked by. They run into a roadblock and are often, what I like to say, is kneecapped when they get to the front door of the manufacturing site and you have operations or plant manager who's being tasked and reports to someone differently, and his metrics are production uptime, number of widgets they make, safety. KPIs, safety, and they're different tasks. And he says, thank you for the offer to help cyber resilient my facility and take my plant offline for a couple hours to do your task, but no thank you. I've got widgets to make and I don't report to you. So there's the disconnect.
Well, it's more than a couple hours, right? I mean, think about it.
Well, right. I was being kind.
Well, and you have to step back and you have to look at, well, how does this technology get into my plant? And the technology I'm referring to is your industrial control system technology.
Yeah.
So your PLCs, the control system network, the infrastructure to support those applications, the networks that are there for the communications between control devices. Again, PLCs, as we talk about, HMIs, drives, motor control centers, robots, AGVs, take your pick, flow meters, a whole litany of assets that are connected to the network at the control system layer that is really out of the purview of the IT organization. And you really have to understand that. And I think a lot of organizations miss that piece to the extent where IT doing their due diligence, doing what they can, doing what they know, but then they're kneecapped when it comes to that control system space because their role is very limited, if it exists at all, in the decisions on what's being chosen in that space,
Yep.
deploying it, who's supporting it, how is it architected, what is it supposed to be doing, right? And that's where we find this gap, right? Everybody talks about IT/OT convergence. It's a great soundbite. The reality of it is there's a disconnect on how these two groups operate between IT and OT and their roles and responsibilities, right? And as we've said multiple times in some of these podcasts is, if you're a CISO, you really are going to have to start building relationships and bridges over to a lot of these system integrators and OEMs and your plant teams in order to really implement your cybersecurity strategy, right? And one size doesn't fit all necessarily, because your plants are not the same. They don't have the same technologies out there. They don't have this equipment is of different era, right? You have control systems around measured in decades, right? Not just a few years. And the people that really know how that stuff works, how to maintain it, what makes it tick, somehow have to get onto your advisory board, if that's what you want to call it, for your OT cybersecurity to assist you with your strategy to deploy and implement and maintain and support an OT cybersecurity architecture within the environment, right?
Well, yeah, it's the same frameworks conceptually, different technologies, different approach, different methods of doing it. But you're right. When the operational environment, the OT team decide what switching platform, layer 2 dumb switches, Netgear from Best Buy, whatever they want to use because of cost goes in there. And they also make the decisions. They own the assets from the robots that you mentioned. They're responsible for maintaining them. If something goes down, they're responsible for updating them. They're responsible for working with the OEM for remote access in situations. If there's an issue, that ecosystem that we've mentioned so many times is different. It's hard for someone on the outside, a responsibility owner of security, to dictate to an asset owner on the inside what to do and how to do it when they don't have skin in the game.
Or there's bad experiences from prior activities that maybe IT was trying to deploy, maybe let's say a firewall.
Yep.
And it's been maybe disruptive to the point where it's caused that unscheduled downtime. And so the OT teams get a little skittish around IT just willy-nilly coming in and start messing within the environment, and vice versa. A lot of IT organizations have been burned enough to say, you know what, I really don't want to get involved in that particular space, right?
Yeah.
But you have to, if you're going to improve your cybersecurity posture around those control systems, right?
Yeah.
And the technologies that are being used for this, you have to make sure that you're looking at the type of technologies that are built for the plant floor. Just like the control systems, and the technologies that are used, those PLCs, when you look at the architecture of those things, how they're designed to live and breathe in an industrial environment. Well, these OT cybersecurity tools are of the same stripe, meaning that the applications, the protocols, what they machine learn on are of that same stripe. So you have to know that whatever tool you might be using in IT, right, the round peg, square hole, it may not fit. And so then maybe you said, well, now we're smart enough to know that we got to pick an OT cybersecurity platform. Great. But then what does it take to really implement, administer, and manage and design that into my environment, right? And if you've never done that before, trying to do it by yourself is a little bit of a recipe for disaster, right? Or it's going to take you much, much, much longer, especially if you're, you've got several plants, dozen plants, 50 plants in your fleet. That task becomes a huge hurdle, right? And so you're going to have to rely on that OT ecosystem to assist you, and you have to leverage them. And if you're not doing that, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage.
Well, look at the resources. The resources alone will normally dictate your ability to scale across your organization. And when you have one or two OT cyber engineers for 10 or 25 or 50 facilities, do the math. There are 2,080 hours in a year. And if it's going to take you X amount of time per day to kind of help manage and advance and, operationalize that technology, you have a finite number that when you hit 2,080, you're done. That's it. That's where you're capped at. So whether that's a virtual OT CISO that can help bridge that gap and work with the IT leadership that has the responsibility, whether that is outsourcing to an organization like ours, whether that is something to bring that resource to bear, however you think that it makes the most sense for you to get it, it's got to be done. It can't, it's not feasible. It just doesn't work.
And you can't do this remotely either, right? Not initially. You can't do it remotely. You have to be on site, right? We have a lot of clients where we see IT, again, trying to move the ball forward. Great, they're doing that, but they don't want to go to the field, right? And so it's like, well, how do you plan on implementing your technology that you're acquiring into a manufacturing facility if you don't go to the field to go look at how that plant is put together? Right. And you just can't look at it from your networking perspective, and the networking perspective being the network that IT is responsible for on-prem at the site, because there's other networks in there that IT is not responsible for. And there's assets out there that IT is not responsible for. And there's production activity that IT is not responsible for, or the safety protocols that go along with it. So that being said, in order to really do this correctly and safely, and without being disruptive, is to be on site.
But I think that the gap is IT is so accustomed and so lackadaisical in their effort, because everything they do can be deployed remotely from we can push endpoint to every asset we own remotely. We can push remote access through Beyond Trust or whoever it is to everything that we do remotely. We can deploy VMs remotely. But when it comes to manufacturing, there are so many differences, so many unique things that you cannot do remotely. Every single plant is different. The setup within a plant is different between cells. From manufacturing of an automobile, you got paint, you got panels, you got glass, they all operate differently, even though they may be similar in nature. You can't paint with one big brush and it work across the uniform, but they want to save their money and they want to we want this technology deployed remotely into our environment. Okay, how's that work? Well, just put it in there. Okay.
Well, the difference is that it's what you just described, or for the systems and network that IT is responsible for, right? That they have responsibility for. If it doesn't work, if there's support that needs to happen, IT has to provide that. IT is not going to provide support for an issue going on between an HMI, a PLC, and drives that aren't working correctly, right? They don't own any of those assets or any of those applications or the network that those things reside on, right? It's completely out of their purview. And so when they do things remotely, it's usually around the things that they have responsibility for. Back to what you said. They have the responsibility, but I don't have the authority, right? Back to that theme. And the authority means that in order for you to continue to provide greater depth of visibility within your industrial control system environment, means that you have to have inherent knowledge of that stuff. And how do you gain that, right? And you can't do that from states away or continents away.
No.
You have to be on-prem in order to really figure out how that plant is put together, in order to determine, where do I drop my collectors? How do I configure them? How do I set up the network in order to get that span traffic up to that platform to start this machine learning and to start implementing these AI activities around not only just the cybersecurity piece, but also the process integrity piece that comes with it, right? There's a huge benefit to the operations teams that when they get a chance to see the data that's being presented and provided by these tools, they're the ones that that have the epiphany. They're the ones that say, oh, I had no idea that this tool could do that. I didn't know that it could give me information about PLC changes to be made in the environment, or the communication flows between these devices, or I got rogue assets in my environment, right? They're not thinking that way because you have to marry those two together. And right now, that's just not happening, not at the level that we would expect to see it.
Well, but how does a CISO that has that responsibility, how do they help bridge that gap? How do they get the two organizations aligned? Is it walk to the plant floor, make new friends, try and understand? Is it to bring somebody in from the outside that can consult and provide that inherent knowledge and that boots on the ground for them, that liaison that reports back up to them to help do it externally? How does an organization move forward? What pieces of this are well, they're all available, but how do they take the next steps, I guess?
Well, you got to get all the liars in the same room for starters, right?
Yeah.
Because even the vendor whose technology you have chosen is not necessarily the best one suited to make this delivery happen. A lot of organizations, as we witness, will leverage a resource from the vendor whose technology they're buying, right? Yep. Some SE that knows the platform pretty well, but doesn't really know how to implement it, into the level of getting it into the plant and setting up and configuring it within the confines of that plant. Again, you have to know how the plant's put together. Yep. And so in a way, it's a disadvantage. You're paying a lot of money for, some system engineer whose tool you bought. Again, they're trying to do things from a remote perspective. And they don't know a lot about the plant. They don't know enough about the plant on how they can take their technology and really push it down into that environment deeper.
Well, it takes a practitioner that works with the tools, that works with various aspects of those industrial networks, understands how they're architected, how they're laid out, what it takes to get those lower level assets and those cells up into that collector. It takes a lot of knowledge.
And negotiations too with the OEM, who is responsible for that piece of equipment, may own it. You might be just leasing it from them, right? It's sitting on your network, but they have kind of barred the door to keep you from, collecting that metadata that's in there, or at least nobody has sat down and had the conversation with them and the right people in order to calm them down. When I'm saying them, I'm talking about your OEM specifically. Right. To say, here, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, this is how we're going to do this, and let me explain it to you, let me show it to you, and then it's a whole different conversation. That doesn't happen with that particular group. And any manufacturer, all you manufacturers that are listening to this, you have OEM equipment on your plant floor that is maintained and managed and supported by that vendor. And they will tell you that if you make changes to that environment, you're going to void their warranty. Right now, you got to be able to demonstrate and show to them, I'm not changing the configuration within that environment. I'm just adding something in there that's siphoning off the metadata out of that environment so I can get asset inventory. Then once I have asset inventory, I can determine what the risks and vulnerabilities are associated with that equipment. Then I can start making steps towards protecting it, whether it be remediation, mitigation, microsegmentation, other technologies that I can implement to harden that cybersecurity posture around those control system assets. And you have to do that in a manner where everybody is going along the same path.
Right. But I still go back to, I got a CISO and you got somebody, VP of IT, pick somebody that's kind of underneath them that says, hey, John, our plants are fine. I was at them last week and we're good. How do they validate? How can they trust but verify, which we like to say all the time? You can't just rely on somebody else. To a degree you can, but you got to, again, trust but verify. You have to know if you're responsible, back to that responsibility versus authority. If I'm signing on the dotted line to the board of directors that everything is secure and we've adhered to the cyber hygiene that we as an organization culturally and fiscally believe is the right thing to do to the shareholders, and if my name goes on it, how do I trust but validate that information?
Yeah. Well, I think some clients are running into this a little bit with cybersecurity insurance, right? Because
Yep.
those insurance carriers are putting an emphasis on asset inventory,
Mhm.
right? And if they know you're a manufacturer and you give them some data, they're going to want to trust and verify that, right? And if they
They
find
are.
out you're only giving them half the story, well, then they're going to take a different course of action of how they're going to provide you cybersecurity insurance, especially two fronts. One, you don't have a good asset inventory. The other side of that coin is what is your method and strategy to reduce the risk associated with those, right?
Hmm.
How are you going about that? And I will tell you right now, working in plants all over the world and been doing this for multiple years, that's not happening. Even clients that have bought these tools and have had them for years still are maybe looking at less than half of the assets in their manufacturing facility because they just don't know how to get after it.
Well, I think that I don't know if they don't know. I think that they're trying to do it cheaper, or they're trying to do it how they're accustomed to from an IT side remotely, and it doesn't work. First off, they don't recognize, maybe they do recognize, maybe they don't care, that there are multiple layers of networks, assets, everything underneath that top layer PLC that they don't even know exist, that are adding to that, which have vulnerabilities equally as much as the top layer. It's that east-west control layer traffic that we often talk about, and those assets that are down there that are outside of the purview of the IT teams that are saying we're good because they don't know. They're not seeing the forest, the millions of trees, because they're standing in front of one giant tree and they can't look around it.
Well, and if you're talking to the plant teams, they may tell you that equipment is air gap, right? Well, how are you going to validate that? It may already be in your baseline, but you don't even know
Right.
that machine that they're saying is air gap is actually really connected.
Yeah.
And it always is connected. And even if you have machines that are truly air gap, somebody's still walking in there at some point for maintenance and support and plugging it into the plant network to get remote access to it, or somebody's showing up with their laptop to plug directly into that machine center. And then you don't know what's on the laptop. Do they have Wi-Fi on it? Do they have a cellular modem on it? What applications and are they running that's on their machine? How do you know they don't have malware on their laptop when they walk into your plant and they plug it into that space? Because it's completely underneath the umbrella of OT's responsibility, and IT just doesn't know who's coming into the plant every day, all day. What
Yeah.
capital projects are they working on? What activities are they working on? They just don't know. And it creates, like I said, a blind spot for the IT organization because there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in these manufacturing facilities. They're just out of your purview.
Well, it's the conversation needs to go from a CISO, and they need to equate it to risk. What's the dollar value of the risk? And how do you equate that and balance that security versus productivity? If it costs me $100,000 to make my product every hour going down the production line, and my risk is $5 million because my outage is 50 hours or whatever that looks like. If something happens, what's the cost to remediate that up front? And what's the mean time to recovery on the backside? So somebody, financial analyst, someone can say, here's what it's going to cost us to fix that. Here's what it's going to cost us if that happens and goes down, or we lose that production line or facility or whatever you're looking at. And it's got to go to dollars and cents. That's how businesses make decisions, is what's their financial risk to the organization and how do you mitigate it? People don't understand what they can't see. And when they can't see all of those assets and all of that inventory and all of that stuff, they don't understand it.
That's the problem, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's like a master plan. Most organizations have a master plan, and the master plan is going after obsolescence, right?
Yeah.
It requires capital. in order to determine what are my most critical machines in my plant that without them, I'm not running very well or I'm not running at all, right? And then how do I put a capital plan together to determine what is end of life and what's in the support, right? So I can put my capital plan together and prioritize which areas in the plant am I going to tackle. Now, I would argue most manufacturers, that's the plant's responsibility, right? The plant's job is to determine what are my old assets that I have, and which ones are end of life, end of support, and which ones do I want to prioritize in a capital plan that I want to go after moving forward, whether the next 3 years or 5 years out, on how I'm going to spend our money in order to remove this obsolescent equipment, right? And anything new coming into your plant, it becomes is more highly connected, right? Anything new coming in is going to have a lot more connectivity, a lot more data that people are going to be chasing with those new machines. So, and that's the plant's responsibility. And so as an IT executive, how do you get plugged into that, right? How do you determine what that master plan is? And you could be a great source of truth for a lot of that if you implement these tools in the correct manner, that you can provide that to these manufacturing leadership teams to determine how they should be structuring their capital plan to go after the obsolescence that they have in their facilities.
Well, as organizations begin to transition that power from responsibility to authority, or put someone in that role to equip them with the power to make the change, to affect production, risk, parameters, they've got to take steps to look at the entire, let's call it supply chain inside that organization, because again, we're seeing that you can't have one half of the equation and expect to make change. It doesn't work. There are outside sources available. There are, models that IT's used forever, from leveraging all kind of different resources. You gotta do something. It can't do the same thing over and over and expect a different result. That's insanity.
Well, I think a lot of it depends on the type of organization. And we could have a podcast on this, the difference between private equity that owns manufacturing environments versus family run or publicly run companies, that are separate from a private equity group whose job is just to extract as much as they can out of it, spend as little as possible and extract as much as they can. If it's that type of an organization, which we've witnessed, they're not going to do a very good job of this. They're just not. They're just going to run it into the ground, right? Until there's no more use for that facility, whatever, versus an organization who's moving in a different direction, has a different plan, how to be, a world-class manufacturer versus a private equity firm that just has a different model, right? And then we've seen that too. We've seen the dynamics between those types of organizations.
Yeah, you're right. So as I guess a final parting comment from my side, at least, as from an organization that's looking to create this CISO, give them the responsibility of overseeing security for the organization, how do they set them up for success with the authority as well? Is that CISO is now the plant manager? Is it, here's your get out of jail free card, because I'm not going to penalize you for production downtime if I'm asking you to shut down the plant while we do these security upgrades? So, what is that mix? How do you task them so that the operations will go in and do what they're being asked to from a security standpoint without being penalized from a production standpoint because they're operating under a different metric?
No, and I think and also under a different business model, right? Back to private equity versus, publicly traded company. You get a private company whose family may have started this business 50 years ago, 70 years ago, and it's grown. Their mindset's a little different than what we've seen with private equity versus, publicly traded companies. So.
Great conversation, and we could go on forever and ever with it.
Hopefully not forever and ever.
Well,
I don't think I'm going to live that long.
yeah, well, everything's got to change like the seasons, right?
Yeah.
So appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave us a review or let us know. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.